Hello, it's Steve here. Today is Saturday the 4th of August 2018 and this is my fourth entry into my video journal all about CBT for emetophobia. Just a quick trigger warning as always, if you also struggle with emetophobia, I will be using a few terms and talking about topics that you might find uncomfortable. I do recommend, if you can, try and persevere through. Part of the CBT process involves discussing your fears and facing your fears, so it's useful to try and get some exposure experience if you can. There won't be anything graphic or any images or anything like that, so hopefully it won't be too difficult for you. So this week has been fairly normal. I've had a couple of situations that were a little bit difficult, but otherwise I feel like I've done pretty well. I've had a couple of nights where I've woken up feeling a bit nauseous, but I'm starting to realise now that a lot of that really is just anxiety acting up. So when you wake up suddenly in the night, your body is suddenly thrown into action. And that can throw you into a bit of an anxious situation, your heartbeat increases, you start to feel uncomfortable. Combine that with the hot weather that we've been having and the general sort of states that we're sleeping in, and it's easy to suddenly believe that what you're feeling is actually the symptoms of food poisoning or something like that, when in reality it never turns out to be the case. And having learned a bit more about how to relax from a meditation that I mentioned last week, I'm finding it a bit easier to realise that there's nothing to worry about and eventually falling back to sleep rather than staying awake for hours, which is nice. Otherwise, I had my girlfriend's graduation on Tuesday, so that was quite a difficult day again. At the start of the day, putting on a suit when it was warm, not very hot but warm, was a bit uncomfortable and a bit unnerving. We took a taxi down to meet her family. The taxi kept getting stuck in traffic, so that was uncomfortable. And then we went through the ceremony, which was about 2 hours, and you kind of had to stay where you were, which again was a bit uncomfortable. And then the crowds trying to get out was all a bit stressful. And then afterwards we went for dinner, and again it was great food, but I was a bit nervous. I hadn't actually eaten all day, so I was hungry, but being so hungry that I felt like if I ate it might shock my stomach and it might make me feel sick. So I didn't really manage to eat that much that day, which isn't good. But generally I didn't panic, I didn't get too bad with it. I think I coped okay, so things are going well. I didn't have a plastic bag with me, so that's working at least. Otherwise, it's been a fairly normal week. It's been pretty quiet. I've got on with things, I've been eating fine and I've been feeling okay. There's been a couple of bouts of nausea here and there, which are fairly normal. But generally, I'm doing pretty good. I didn't actually have a therapy session this week. My therapist was on holiday, so I've just been kind of getting on with the exercises. So there's nothing new to report in terms of the CBT process. What I thought I'd do instead is talk about what I know about anxiety and fear and how the body processes that and why we feel the things that we do. As someone who's struggled with this for quite a long time, I've researched it plenty and I've learned a lot about it. Earlier in my experience of this, when I first tried to get some therapy, I was sent through some group sessions where I would sit almost in a sort of lecture situation, and they talked to us about what happens and how to deal with anxiety and how to kind of keep yourself calm and process those situations in a very kind of general way. I've also been listening to an audiobook called Rewiring Your Anxious Brain, which has been really interesting, and that's also taught me a lot more about the biology of survival and fear and how this all comes together and why we feel the way that we do. So to put it simply, I think a lot of us who deal with phobias and anxiety, we probably get quite annoyed with ourselves and annoyed with the fact that this is the way that our body works. And it is frustrating and it does kind of have a negative impact on your life quite a lot of the time. But the reality is that what we feel and the symptoms that we feel are all part of a very important survival trait that's been passed down through evolution. And in fact, without it, we probably wouldn't even be here. So to really understand it, you need to go back to hunter-gatherer times, before civilization really, when we were just animals out in the wild. In those situations, humans had predators that we need to watch for, we lived naturally and we were food to other animals, so we had to be a lot more alert and a lot more aware of potential threats around us. Imagine that you're a hunter-gatherer and you're walking through the forest and you're trying to forage for food. You would need to be aware of everything that's going on around you and be able to respond to threats and danger quickly without having to think too much about it. And what evolution has given us is two parts of the brain that deal with that situation. The first is the cortex, which is the main part of the brain where you store all of your memories and your thoughts and all of that. and that's where you process information and understand the world around you. The other part is the amygdala, which is about that big, and it sits right in the middle of the brain, and that is in charge of processing things, thoughts that you don't necessarily realize that you have. It actually stores memories, but they're not memories you can access. They're not visual memories. They're more kind of emotional memories. The amygdala is also responsible for releasing adrenaline, and it kind of takes control of the body when a threat appears. So again, imagine you're walking through the forest and you hear a rustling. The amygdala has learned through your life experiences that the sounds around you could potentially imply that there's a threat. Maybe it's a bear hiding in the woods somewhere. Now what happens at that point is the amygdala starts to release adrenaline, and adrenaline is a key hormone in controlling the body in situations of danger. This is where the fight, flight or freeze response idea comes from. So when that adrenaline starts pumping into your body and it starts going through your bloodstream, your biology, the processes in your body start to change so that you can be prepared for physical action. So for example, you start breathing a bit more heavily, and that's to get more oxygen into the blood so that you can be ready to physically move. The heart rate increases so that blood can flow to the extremities of the body, so that again you can be ready to use your muscles and to respond. So you'll become more aware of your surroundings, your senses pick up and you start to focus more on what's going on around you, and your thoughts start to process what might be happening. Another symptom which is more relevant to emetophobia is you may start to feel nauseous. The reason behind this is actually because the blood flow in the body changes its focus on what it needs to do. Now in a situation of danger, digestion is really not that important. So because of that, the blood actually moves away from the stomach and the intestines so that it can use that in more important areas. Obviously digestion is important, but in this situation it's kind of a luxury. It can wait while we've got to deal with a potential threat. And then say for example we actually see a bear and we need to move, then that's when the amygdala kind of takes over and we start to do whatever it is that you're supposed to do when you see a bear. I'm not really sure what it is. Run away, lie on the ground, I don't know. But the body just kind of takes control of itself and you're not really able to stop it in that situation. The other thing about the amygdala is that it has a lot of neurons going out into the cortex, but there's not many going back the other way. So when the amygdala gets into control of your body, and when it starts to process and release adrenaline and increase your breathing and all of these things, it's very hard to convince it not to do that, because the big part of your brain, the cortex, can't actually really speak to it. It's not listening, it's just doing what it knows what it needs to do, which is important because it has helped us survive in the past. But the problem is, in modern society, we don't really face that many threats, at least not that kind. There are situations where having the amygdala is important. For example, if you're driving on a fast road, on a motorway, and all of a sudden the car in front of you stops, you need to be able to stop your car without having to process the situation. You know, you don't want to be sat there thinking, oh, this car in front of me has stopped, I'm getting quite close to it now, I need to put my foot on the brake and press it down hard. So there's no time for that. This is not the situation for that to work. Instead, your amygdala immediately understands that situation and you slam that brake before you even think about hitting it. That helped you survive in that situation. But otherwise, it's very rare that we face predators now, unless you live in Canada, I guess, and you have to deal with bears. But most of us don't have that many threats around us. But despite that, the amygdala is still very active and still very much doing its job and still trying to look out for threats. The way that you develop a phobia is that the amygdala identifies some sort of thing that's happened that was unpleasant, that was scary, that you learn to fear, and it processes that and it stores it and it's ready for the next time that you face that situation. So as someone with emetophobia, what you'll realise is that if you ever feel the slightest bit nauseous, that will make you scared, and that will make your amygdala take over, and you'll start hyperventilating and you'll start to feel uncomfortable and your heart rate might increase and all of these things because your body is getting ready to deal with a threat. The reality is there is no threat, but the problem specifically with emetophobia is that what you fear is actually a symptom of fear itself. So for example, I don't particularly like being on public transport or being in busy places, and if I know that I have to do that at some point today, if I know that I have to go out into town or whatever, then immediately my amygdala remembers that these are situations that I don't like because of, if you think back to that first episode, that Foo Fighters concert that I was at where I was in the crowd and then we all fell over and I started dry heaving. So I've made all these associations in that situation and my amygdala has that stored. So as soon as I know that I have to face that situation, it kicks in and it starts preparing for that potential threat that isn't really there. The amygdala does what it has to do, which makes me feel a bit nauseous, as I explained before. That nausea then makes me more anxious, which ramps up that amygdala and the adrenaline. And so these symptoms can kind of spiral out of control very quickly. And before you know it, you're having a full-blown panic attack. It's happened to me plenty of times. I've been there. I know what it's like. And I know that it's horrible. And as before, it's very hard to convince yourself that there isn't a threat. A, because your amygdala is in control right now and you can't really stop it. And B, you're physically feeling the symptoms of the thing that you fear, so it's not easy to tell yourself that you're not going to be sick because you're actually feeling it. The reality is that when you feel these symptoms and when the blood flow moves away from the stomach area, to prepare for fight or flight, your digestion kind of shuts down. It goes on hold. And because of that, it's pretty unlikely, if not near impossible, that you're going to be sick because of it. That's the reality of it. I've spoken about this with my therapist and she's confirmed that you can't really be sick from fear as such. That's not to say that it doesn't ever happen. Obviously people do get sick, but it's very unlikely to happen. But of course, even knowing that and knowing how it works doesn't necessarily convince you anyway, because you're still feeling it. So how does knowing about this help? How does understanding the way the body works actually do anything for you? Well, for me, what I learned was how to compensate for the action of the amygdala. The first thing that I learned, which was really useful, was some breathing techniques. And one of the first things that adrenaline will do is increase your breathing and you'll start hyperventilating. And hyperventilating can be very subtle. It doesn't necessarily need to be, sat there breathing. It's not necessarily going to be like that. It could just be an extra couple of breaths every minute. But stretch that over half an hour while you're not actually using any physical energy. You are really increasing the amount of oxygen in your blood, which is making you feel more anxious. So what you can do to compensate with that is learn some really simple breathing exercises. And I found that counting it out, so I would count in for 5 and then out for 7. And another thing you can do is have one hand on your chest, one hand on your stomach, and try and breathe without moving your chest. So you're actually using your diaphragm to kind of pull down and pull that air in. And that decreases the amount of space that your lungs expand by to take in the air. So even though you feel like you really need to breathe, you're just keeping it as close to a regular breathing level as you can. So in for 5 and then out for 7, and slowing down your breathing. And what you'll find that does is it just reduces the amount of oxygen going in. The other thing that I've started to learn is trying as much as I can to understand the circumstance that I'm going through and understanding what it is that I'm actually scared of and why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling. So last week I mentioned the meditation that my therapist had suggested to me, and it's called a self-compassion break. And that's all about acknowledging that you are suffering right now, acknowledging that you are scared and that you have a problem, acknowledging that that's very normal and you're not alone with it, and lots of other people suffer all the time because that's just part of being human. And then giving yourself some compassion for that. So comforting yourself, thinking about how you would treat a friend if they were going through the same thing. All too often I think we get angry with ourselves for feeling scared when we don't need to, but that really doesn't help you stay calm. Imagine if someone else talked to you when you were having a panic attack and they started shouting at you and told you to calm down and stop panicking. It's not going to work. It's not going to make you feel better. But comforting yourself, talking to yourself and understanding that what you're feeling is normal and that it will pass and you will be okay, that can help you stay calm and relax. These things, along with lots of others, are the way that you train your amygdala to stop recognizing a threat that isn't there. This is the whole CBT process. It's about exposing yourself to the things that you're scared of, the things that you associate with your fear, training yourself to understand that they are not things to be scared of, and gradually rewriting that part of your brain that believes that there is something to be scared of. As before, as I explained in the last session, emetophobia is one of those phobias that is really enforced by the behaviours that we inhibit. The way that we change our lives to suit the fear enables the fear to exist. Carrying around a plastic bag, carrying water, avoiding busy spaces, being careful with food, not eating certain things, all of these things just enforce this idea that there is something to be scared of and that there is actually a threat. The only way that you can rewrite that is by facing these fears and learning that they're nothing to be scared of. And ultimately, at the end of it, should you come to a situation where you do actually need to be sick and where it does actually happen, you will hopefully be able to put the same processes into practice and be able to say, this is not a threat, nothing is hurting me here, I will be fine. It's an unpleasant experience, I'm suffering, but I will be okay. And once you can learn that and understand that, you'll start to get better. This is what a therapist will teach you, and this is what they will train you to do. So that's kind of how it all works. That's what happens in the body. I think it's helpful to understand that the process of fear that we actually feel is very normal, it's very important, it helps us survive. We're just doing it a bit wrong. We can't necessarily stop it from happening, but we can start to train ourselves out of that, and things will be okay. Hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into that. I think this has been quite a long video, so hopefully it's been useful. Again, as always, any questions or comments, please do feel free to drop me a comment below and I'll be happy to have a chat. If you're also going through the process, hope you're doing well. Otherwise, that's it from me, so I'll give you another video next week. Thanks, bye.